Yeah, so we've got an amazing panel from Envision. If you haven't used Envision before, it's an awesome prototyping tool, and lots of other things too that I'm sure we'll hear from in a moment. I use it every day pretty much. This is great. Our speakers are going to be Rebecca, Andrew, Pazit, and Pete. So if I can ask you all to put your cameras on and your mics on.
I believe we do have a video about Envision that we want to play before we start as well.
Awesome.
Envision is a faster way to certainty.
It's a tool that allows us to bring design to life and get us the information that we need to make really good decisions.
It's helped us to rapidly iterate and rapidly prototype in ways that were much more time-consuming in the past.
It will literally cut 60% of a project's time for creative development, really.
Everyone's on it, and that's not just design, that's engineering, that's product managers, QA. There's this shared understanding, shared thinking. It's changed the way we design.
There are no boundaries at Twitter. It's an entirely transparent company. Envision allows us to really show everything to everybody in one nice, clean, understandable format.
It's absolutely been essential to us, and now we just can't live without it.
Fantastic. So here we are. We also have Rebecca here. Is Rebecca able to turn her camera on? Whilst we're waiting, should we just do a quick introduction? Pete, would you be able to do a quick introduction of yourself to start off with?
Absolutely, Luke. Really happy to be here. My name is Pete Peterson. I lead product experience design for all B2B products at MasterCard. I've been with MasterCard for a year and a half. And prior to joining, I have lived and worked out of the San Francisco Bay Area for a long time and have had the opportunity to work in a lot of different industries, design and engineering software with Autodesk, finance with BlackRock, insurance, healthcare, a lot of regulated spaces, and most recently at eBay StubHub, managing the C2C marketplace for all native apps and desktop. And really excited to be here with you guys and have a great discussion.
Fantastic. Rebecca's here now, so if you want to take over from here, Rebecca.
Thanks for hanging in there, Luke. I know that's always nerve-wracking. Yes, so we have a lot to cover, and I want to make sure that we dive in because we are going to be talking about something that's really salient to everyone, I think, which is how is design maturing as an organization within your broader organization? This is something that we did a study on years ago, but we are going to leave 15 minutes at the end for your questions. And most of this session is going to be some real storytelling and examples from these three folks who are here with me. So if you have questions for any of them as we go, please go ahead and drop those in the Q&A. And before we dive in, I think we have a quick introductory video to Envision. Did we already show that? I was busy getting my camera on.
Rebecca, we already showed the intro, but we did one introduction to Peterson, but we haven't done an introduction to
still need those. Okay, cool. Sorry, I was getting caught up before we got in. So we covered Pete. Pazit, why don't you go next and just tell us about your role and your team a little bit?
Yes, so my name is Pazit. I'm in the Bay Area. I am a principal product designer at Inject, and right now I am part of the QBO Advanced team, and we are trying to solve for the needs of mid-size businesses. I actually started my FinTech journey at a small company that was producing wallets for buying and selling digital gold coins. Glad to be here.
Very cool. How about you, Andrew? Can we get a quick intro to you and your team?
Yeah, sure, no worries. My name is Andy LaMonica. I'm a design executive. I've been doing this for about 20 years. I mean, I love leveraging design to solve the complex business problems. Currently, I'm the VP of Design Leadership at Northwestern Mutual, and I'm really excited to chat with you all today.
That is awesome. I love that we have such a mix of, different types of FinServe products and services here represented. So let's bring up those slides real quick. I just want to give everyone some context. This isn't going to be a big presentation. Like I said, this is a discussion and some storytelling, but just to set the stage. In 2019, Envision did this, really broad and deep report about what does it take to level up the design maturity of your organization, and what are the business impacts of investing in your design organization. There have been like McKinsey studies, and Forrester had looked into it, but nobody had really looked at what are the individual behaviors of the team that actually make up a mature design organization. And then conversely, what does that mean in terms of money and business benefits? And go back one slide to the white one. This is a very broad overview of what we found. We found that there's a pretty consistent 5 levels that break out across the design maturity spectrum that you can predictably sort organizations into. At level 1, it's really how much influence the organization has. And at the lowest levels of design maturity, design is still kind of stuck in a corner. They're still working on wireframes. Could we pull that slide back up? They're still working on wireframes and comps and things like that. And they're kind of just being assigned work by the business. They're not allowed to think for themselves or to influence the organization. And at that level of design maturity, really the only thing that they can impact is product usability. So they're not having a huge impact on the overall organization. Then as design starts to grow its influence a little more, you see them doing workshops, they're sharing their tools with other teams like engineering and product, and they're working with stakeholders in the business to start to make decisions together. So their influence has gone one step beyond the design team. And at that point, they're also able to impact customer satisfaction. But where you really see the business benefits take off, it's not at level 1, 2, or 3. It's when they get up to the highest levels of maturity at level 4 and 5. And that's some of the behaviors we've actually been hearing a lot about today. Everyone who has spoken so far that I've heard today has spent a lot of time talking about really rigorous research practices and testing and getting to know your users and applying data to your decisions. And those are very complex, advanced behaviors that you see in mature design organizations. They start to invest in design systems, they start to invest in intelligence, and they're actually getting ahead of the business and leading the product leaders and the rest of the teams on where they should be going next with the product. And that is when you see the big breakout in business benefits. Suddenly, they're actually affecting IP. They're getting patents for the organization, and they're starting to affect valuation and market share and these big money numbers. And design is driving all of that. But here's what we see. We can go to the next slide now. When you look at a low maturity organization and you compare it to a very high maturity organization, the impact is just completely outsized. On the left here, you have, high maturity design organization. They are 92% of those businesses said that design is affecting our revenue. They actually get us more money. 26 times more likely to say that design actually affects our valuation. They're affecting time to market. They're making cost savings by making things more efficient for the other teams, actually designing the way they work together. So the business is recognizing that this is a big deal. Like, this is actually making money for us to have our design team working in this way. But what we found, if you go to the next one, is that the vast majority of companies, this is all industries, not just FinServe, the vast majority of companies are still in levels 1 through 3. That's 83%. So they're not getting those big business benefits that the very mature organizations are getting. The vast majority of them are still kind of stuck in a corner. They don't have a lot of influence, and they're still just starting to build these bigger systems and to get outside of their corner. Can you go to the next slide, please? This is just North America. North America tends to be a little more mature than some of the other industries, like in Europe and the Middle East or in APAC. So you see that, for all industries across North America, there's fewer people fewer organizations in the levels 1 through 3, and there's a few more that are over in the higher, levels of maturity. So overall, just a more mature landscape in general. But if you go to the next slide, this is FinServe. If you look at FinServ in just North America, it is a stark difference as far as how many of them are still stuck at that very bottom rung of maturity. This was in 2019. We still saw that over half of them were at the very lowest level. They're still stuck in a corner. They're just taking orders and doing comps. And very few have gotten up to level 5. But 2020, as we know, was a watershed moment, and it changed everything. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Because at Envision, we talked to clients all over the world, and we found that, you know, people who had these 3 to 5 year plans for how they were going to digitize all of their financial services had to do it now or perish, basically. So it's not that surprising that when we looked at the numbers again halfway through 2020, we found that FinServ overall has leveled up from an average level 1 to an average level 2. So a whole level difference between 2019 and 2020, which I think, talking to you three, that probably doesn't surprise you, does it? I wouldn't think so. Yeah, and I want to ask the audience this too. We have a poll for you. How has this gone at your company? Do you feel like over the last year from 2020 on, has your organization gone backwards? Have you kind of stayed the same? Have you grown a little, or have you grown a lot in your design maturity? And remember, that's practices like, you know, investing in design systems, you know, working on your partnerships with other disciplines, that is working on building out sophisticated research practices. You might start having higher leadership levels within design. So you might start to have like VPs of design and a chief design officer, where before there were none. Maybe there was just a director. So let us know how you feel like it went at your company. And I would love to see how that goes. Okay, good. Okay, so this is about what we would expect. So about 52% of you are saying that we did grow a little. 31% of you said you grew a lot, which is exactly what we want to talk about today. We want to see how we can expand on this, you know, kind of overnight change that happened in 2020, and how can we do this in a continuous, sustainable way. And that's why we have brought these three lovely people here together to share their examples and stories of how this happened in their organizations and how they're thinking about it for the future. So to kick us off, why don't the three of you each in turn tell me, what examples or evidence do you have? Like, what is the biggest evidence that you've seen that shows you that design maturity changed last year at your company? Let's start with you, Pazit. Just real briefly, what was the biggest example for you?
So it's not so much Intuit. I think of Intuit as a pretty mature design organization. So, you know, so the delta wasn't really very big. What I found interesting in the last year is, or even surprising, is the level of productivity, even though everybody was working from home.
Yeah.
The velocity of our work has not changed. And I, as somebody that really did not work remotely before, I thought that was really interesting. We essentially transferred everything online, design thinking workshops, research, everything that we were used to do in, you know, face-to-face, transitioned online. But it didn't really affect the velocity. So in that sense, I found it fascinating.
That's hugely telling in itself, if you already had that kind of efficiency before you started.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. How about you, Pete? What was your biggest example?
Yeah, no, I definitely second what Pazit made, the point she made about the ability to pick up and react to the change and not lose to steam. In fact, accelerate in certain areas. One thing that really comes to mind for me is the way in which, if we look at our roles from a design perspective and the ability for us to influence user experience and customer experience, is we are seen as influencers, right? In the past, we work really hard to influence our peers and partners and leadership. And we, from a degree of direct control, we have worked really hard to create design systems and great operating models that dictate what should be done when, so that we don't operate on assumptions and we can experiment really rapidly, right? So those are all things that we can control. But as we go into outer concentric circles of diminished control, it just gets harder, right? And we go into that level of influence and advocacy. And one great thing that we have now is from the C-level down, we have a company-wide way to measure user experience in all customer-facing programs and products, which provides that it shifts it very radically from a level of advocacy to that of expectation. And
wow, that's powerful.
And the tone from a lot of folks that typically in the past have been like, yeah, we care about user experience. But when push comes to shove, right, they have other metrics that they are beholden to. But now, you know, C-level down, that expectation has changed. So that has really, really been helpful for folks in my organization and peer design leadership functions.
It's amazing what a difference it makes to just have a number attached to something. Something that you can, suddenly it becomes real to people who, you know, before it was just kind of this abstract idea that they didn't have to think about. How about you, Andrew? What was your biggest?
Well, I'm gonna yes and something Pete said, where he's talking about the concentric circles of control, because that's something that design, not just in FinServe and FinTech, but like across the board, it's something that we all struggle with. And we had two really big things that actually widened the circle. One was our design systems, because you're able to make impact across the enterprise and it's at scale. And the other thing was upskilling the design business unit to be better leaders. The design systems are great because like once you get that like at a mature level, and we were actually a pretty good example of that in the industry, like everything's more effective. Like things are more efficient, like you're immediately increasing the productivity of your teams, like you're reducing your tech debt, you know, and a lot of my leaders are economists. So like we're having financial conversations all the time. You're not like duplicating work. And the cool thing is you're making products that are more sustainable. Like when you're in FinServe, you're dealing with kind of like, for the most cases, we're dealing with the lifetime of a client. And for like the big dogs, like you're dealing with generational aspects of your product.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
But the thing that's like super cool for me is with the design systems is that it's a fast track for accessibility and inclusion. Like that's an $8 trillion market opportunity. And the FinServe who figures that out, like in an effective way, you're going to get a big piece of that. Like, so that circles the design system aspect. And for the upskilling of the business unit, to make them better leaders. So like outside of my day job, I'm also an executive coach for like design and product leaders. So this was kind of like in my wheelhouse. Yeah, it just kind of worked. And we have a design business unit of about 100, I think we're at 40 now, 140 people. So like helping them will give them the tools and techniques to not only be like amazing design leaders, but also effective business leaders, like in reframing conversations. So they're about outcomes, not output. So like the design systems and making better design leaders, you're just making that concentric circle of like control and influence, you're just making it bigger. So it's really effective.
Man.
And I'll stop talking now.
No, actually, I want you to keep talking next, because I want you to tell us, I talk to a lot of teams that are, especially at FinServe, they're working so hard to build out these design systems. I think in some ways it's easier at the smaller, more nimble, younger FinTechs that have just gotten started because they can start the right way, hopefully, and, you know, have their design system in place from the beginning. But sometimes at these larger organizations that, you know, they're 200 years old, they've never heard of a design system. They have their ways of working and they're kind of stuck in them. It's this uphill battle to prove that this is worthy work. Like this is going to make us better, faster, and it's going to make things more accessible, like you were saying. And they have to learn how to put on their lawyer hat almost and go to bat for their design system. And most design leaders aren't equipped for that. They don't know where to start to make this argument and find these numbers. And we get this question all the time, like, how do I prove it? Like, how do I prove that my design system is actually worth the money that we're investing in it? So I want to hear more, since your business coach hat is on. How do you go about, you know, making that business case for design system work, for design ops work, for any of this?
All right, it's actually a very simple framework, and I'm gonna couch this into you talked about like old historic institutions. I worked at 3 companies that are over 100 years old. I worked at GE, the Olympics, and Northwestern Mutual, which is 165 years old. So
Wow.
that's a lot of
inertia.
that's a lot of institutional processes. But here's what you're going to do. It's super simple. You're going to get data. You're going to build a case, like you're going to build a strong argument, and you're going to find stakeholders who agree with you.
And what do you do with those stakeholders when you have them, though? Like, what's the step there? What's the play?
Well, you have the data. And you have the argument. I'm sorry, I'm hearing some reverb, so I'm trying to manage the volume on this one. But like, if you have data and you have an argument that makes sense, it's hard to argue with data. It really is. Like, there's the Jeff Bezos famous thing. It's like, all right, if we're going to deal with opinions, let's just deal with the hippo, which is the highest paid person's opinion, which is mine. But if you have data, I'll listen to data. You know, it usually makes a really compelling argument. I think the challenge that most design organizations have is starting the data, tooling the metrics, and putting that infrastructure in place so you can have a business-led conversation, not a design-led conversation. Is that helpful context? And feel free to like throw in the chat if this doesn't make sense or you need me to unpack this a little bit.
Yeah, and there's something that happens even before that. The question we get before that is, how do you choose the data? Like, how do you know which data you're going after? How do you know what to measure? How do you go about choosing which metrics you should be looking at before you set up all your tooling and measurements?
All right. So there's a couple things that executive leaders care about. One is productivity. 2 is efficiency. Another is cost saving. If you could hit, like, there's more, but like, those are the big 3. If you can address any of those, like, that's the first page of your PowerPoint deck. You know, you're addressing the 3 things that most executives care about. You want to get super crafty. Every company, every year, actually, you can do it quarterly. What are their G's and O's? What are their goals and objectives? If you could ladder whatever you're doing that addresses one of those goals and objectives, your argument's being made for itself. If you're doing a design system that probably addresses maybe 2 or 3 of the 5, I mean, your argument's a lot easier. Pete's nodding his head. He's like, you've had those conversations, right, man? You know, and
yeah. I want to get Pete and Pezzi to actually weigh in on this. Have y'all found this to be true too? Have you had to train your designers to do this?
I mean, definitely. I am vigorously in agreement. And, you know, Andrew is making it sound really, really simple, and credit to him. You know, I find it to be, maybe this is learned behavior for me, whereas Andrew has slipped into like the sweet spot, but I'm definitely there with him. And one thing I want to add is, if you can create an objective argument rather than a subjective kind of my opinion, your opinion, that just takes a lot of emotion out of it. And it also level sets whether you are at a different level in the company. That takes that out of the equation, right? Your voice is just as important as whomever else's if they happen to be at a higher level, where the decisions are usually and the purses are usually kept, right? Another thing is, you can directly say, if the argument isn't going your way, you can say, well, this is a risk that unfortunately you will own, right? And we have created an objective statement as to there is a missed opportunity and a resulting risk in us not going in this direction, and here's why. And of course, the tone isn't that dramatic, but it's implied. So you can really kind of level set the playing field. And this goes for, you know, a designer or user researcher who's just starting out, who is leveraging their design leader's deck, like Andrew mentioned, right? Or if you're up at a VP level, like Andrew and myself, we can talk to SVPs and beyond and really kind of create that objective argument that is really for their benefit.
That's really smart. And I mean, it applies to all those sales principles that, you know, people are so much more likely to respond to risk and fear, honestly, than they are to opportunity, which is sad, but it's good to have those numbers.
Yeah, I think it really depends. So there are many factors to thinking about design system and creating design system and bringing the importance of it within your organization. It depends on a lot of things. Sometimes you work in a really small company, a startup, for example, and you're building something from scratch, where you are maybe the one designer, or you have a couple of other designers. And very quickly in the process, you realize that if you are not going to start creating some kind of a system, things are just going to take much longer. There's going to be inconsistency, and you're going to hear it back. I mean, it's just going to come right at you from the engineers, from the QA. So very early on, you can realize the need. And if it's a small company, a small team, the engineers, everybody realizes it, because they can see the difference between a designer sitting and creating new patterns every day for something else, and the engineers having to create it in the code, and it takes too much time. So that's in a small scale. You can very quickly realize it, and it becomes clear to the rest of the cross-functional stakeholders. And then in a big company, like Intuit, if you have such a huge product with so many different features, if you don't have a design system, the price is very high from the experience, because there's just not inconsistency, and you hear it back from the users. We listen to VOCs all the time, so you can hear it back from the customers, but you can also sense it from the design production point of view, where things just take much longer. If I have to think about a flow, and I can go into my tool and I have everything there, I can just drag and drop and quickly put together a task flow and share it with my team and have an opinion about it within like an hour or two, versus I have to recreate everything from scratch, which will take me maybe a couple of days to a week. That's a lot of money, right, of my time. So so it makes a lot of sense, and I think that bottom up, you can bring it into the organization as a designer, but also the organization itself will sense the inefficiency and will want that as well.
That's such a good point. And when you think about design maturity kind of being a product of influence, or a function of influence, I think one of the best ways for designers to be able to build influence is to have time to actually have these conversations, which is what a design system gives you. It gives you time. It takes all that repetitive work out so that you can actually focus on having real conversations with other people on your team and with customers, and making decisions that actually matter, and spending time investing in those partnerships, across the organization. That's a big deal. Pazit, I wanted to ask you more about, you kind of talked about how you were already, there was already a great deal of design maturity at Intuit before the pandemic happened, which is a nice place to be. And it sounds like, everyone adapted very quickly, even when, the offices disappeared and they had to rethink their workflows very quickly. You also talked about, having this culture of experimentation and coaching. It sounds very alive and very connected. Can you just tell us more about how does that come about? How do you keep and maintain and build this culture of, constant coaching, constant trying things, and being able to fail quickly and figure out what works so rapidly?
Sure. So the first thing I want to kind of distinguish is between so when you think about FinTech, right? So you have technology companies that are creating software to help or create financial services. And then you have financial institutions like banks. And there is a big difference between how those two different categories approach product development. I would say financial institutions are still early in their product development stage, and as such, kind of embracing design as part of the product development. Intuit is a technology company, right? And we are building financial software, so we know how to build products. We have the processes, we have the collaboration, we have design is very much part of the process from the beginning. So that's what I meant in terms of us being already a design mature organization. Now, in terms of experimentation and collaboration. Everything we do starts with trying to solve a customer problem. So we spend a lot of time on trying to define what the problem is, and we do it collaboratively. So we work together with the PMs, with the data scientists. We talk to customers all the time to really try to understand what is the problem that we're going to try to solve, and if that is the right problem. And then there's a lot of decision making whether that makes sense for the business. So we always start with the problem, and then we go into defining the vision. So if we know the problem that we're trying to solve, then we try to understand, okay, what's the target state? What is the vision of the experience? What is, like, 5 years from now, what do we want that to be? And then slowly we break it down and make a lot of hypotheses on how we're solving that for that vision. And then we start the experimentation. So problem, vision, hypothesis, and experimentation on top of those hypotheses. So we build, experiment, learn, and then build again, experiment, learn.
I hope you know how advanced that is. It's really rare that I hear from a team that has vision even included in their research and experimentation and planning process. Usually it's, everybody's working in 2-week sprints, and it's really hard for them to balance that short-sighted, like, we have to fix these bugs and we have to get out this new feature and we have to do these things and deliver, but balance that against, like, we also have a vision for where we're going 5 years from now, and we need to be thinking longer term than the next 2 weeks. That's really beautiful that y'all are doing that.
Yeah, and on top of that, we also have to tee up to our big bets. So the company has mission and vision, and everything we do has to tee up to a specific big bet or a specific mission. And we talk, it's part of our language, it's part of the culture. What big bet are you working on? Like that's kind of like how we talk. And it helps you, on the day-to-day, basis, level up. Okay, I know what I'm doing. I know where I'm going. This is just small part of the interaction, but I know the big picture. I know where it's going. So that helps.
Very cool. I think we might have lost Pete. That's okay. How about you, Andrew? Have y'all been able to build this, culture of rapid experimentation and planning? Do you feel like there's kind of a vision outlook going on yet?
Well, I think the rapid iteration is something that, if you're going to be a customer-focused organization, it's table stakes. Like, you need to do regular testing of your work and put it in front of users and have them tell you what's working and what's not. I mean, any organization who's not doing a test and learned approach, you're not going to be here long.
Yep. Yeah, and that's why it's one of the dimensions of maturity. You have to become a data organization at some point.
Yeah.
Pete, you had something about that where you were talking about how you kind of developed this scorecard and this, like, standard of excellence. I want to hear about this. Like, how did this develop and how did you get everybody to implement it? Because that's a huge change to undergo.
Are we talking to Pete or Andrew?
Did I say someone else? Sorry, I meant Pete.
Okay.
Yes, you, Pete.
Yeah. Well, scorecard is certainly one piece of it that is really, really effective and exposes a lot of information. And we're having great success with that. And of course, senior stakeholders love that, right? Because it's easy to understand. It doesn't take too long to consume it, and it provides a lot of accountability up and down, right? So there's nowhere to hide. Another piece that I'm really, really excited about from a maturity standpoint is, as we know, certainly in large companies, there's a lot of pockets of design and user research, right? And stitching them together can be a challenge. And it's very, very powerful when you come at it in a unified approach. So one thing that I'm really excited about is CX&D Guild that we have within MasterCard. And it is replicating a format that we've had for a long time for other cross-functional disciplines, that is company-wide, one for engineering, one for business, etc. But we have a formalized CX&D guild that lines up into our Chief Innovation Officer. And it's led by Cindy Chastain, who is one of my design peers. And she's taking us through this from a company-wide standpoint. And she's tying together design leaders into a board. So I am on a board where we have a campfire, if you will, a circle around a campfire with design leaders who really are focused on clear outcomes. This isn't some club to talk about colors and palettes. It's about assigning accountability for clear outcomes from a design standpoint. And I mean, it's really just about strengthening our ability to create really good products for our customers. And so clear job families, clear training for our teams, unified tools, budget, and it really, the fact that we can all affect that control on behalf of the various designers and user researchers across the company and have it ladder up into our Chief Innovation Officer, it's very, very powerful. So I'm just so pleased with it, and we're seeing a tremendous amount of value from it.
That is very powerful. And that's not the first time I've heard of design organizations kind of patterning their guild structures after engineering and some of these other practices that had already, figured out how to develop these communities and these like consistency practices across the board. One question though, as you were talking, I know at Envision we do something called the Design Maturity Assessment. Some of y'all have done it at your organizations, where we go in and we ask teams. This is where we get this data. We ask teams like, what are you doing? What kind of impact is it having? And we find that just bringing in an assessment like that can be very threatening, because design, it's still new and they're not necessarily used to having numbers and, I want to say rigor applied to their practices. And I'm wondering if you're talking about bringing out a scorecard that everybody's going to be held to, was there any emotional pushback or fear or, nerves about suddenly being held to a number like that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And we're all humans and we bring those emotions, right? I find that designers are constantly pushing boundaries, and they're usually held back by certain elements, whatever they may be. We can list them all here or in the chat. So they're usually very open to acknowledging what's working and what isn't. And so usually they're never the worry, right? And I find one thing about the maturity assessment, which we recently took, and I advocate for that up and down, very, very powerful, is it opens up the conversation. Like you mentioned, Rebecca, it brings it into a place where we can talk about it and have something to point at and have a realization that we can work on this. We're doing really well over here. Let's continue doing that. But let's start addressing this area over here. And we can just create that roadmap for how to couple it together, put the puzzle pieces down, right? And create that holistic picture that will set us up for success down the line. But yeah, when I took my team through it, I had that quiet worry, and I exposed that worry to the team and just said, how do you guys feel? And they were fine. But I do feel for folks, if you're worried, if the light is being shined on you, how do you take that obstacle and turn it into an opportunity, right?
I was going to fast follow what he said. I had a roadblock early on when we did the design maturity assessment, because I had two business leaders being like, "You're going to tell us how mature we are?" No. So what I learned from that really quickly is, in all internal correspondence, I just called it the DMA, and I'm like, "We're gonna do competitive benchmarking. That's what this is." And
ooh, I love that competitive benchmarking. You brought that risk in there, that little fear.
Yeah, well, I mean, I work in human behavior. Like I'm good at my job. Like just addressing that loss aversion and being like, no, we're going to see where we stand. And the great thing about this is the outcome, not the output, is that we're going to have very clear signals from this independent competitive benchmarking about where we can improve and where our strengths and weaknesses are. Like when I framed the enterprise correspondence that way, I got a whole lot more compliance.
That is very sly.
I love it.
I want to make sure that we have time to get into everybody's questions, because there's a lot, and not surprised there always is around design maturity topics, especially since y'all have great examples that people want to hear more about. The top voted one here is actually, I knew it would, it's about that metric you mentioned, Pete. They want to know exactly what it is. Like, how did you said you had a consistent cross-product metric that was developed. What is that? Are you allowed to say?
Yeah, it's more of a category, and it depends on which program and which product you're talking about. So it's a discrete and high level expectation from C-level down, and then it will be depending on where you are in the organization and which program or product, customer-facing product, you're in charge of. It will take on different forms. And from there, I definitely want to make sure that I'm not going into a place where I'll get called by the lawyers. But I can say that, and I'm happy to have offline conversations with folks, but just think of it in terms of, it's not a nice to have anymore. It's not something that, hey, let's think about the customer if we have time, right? It is an expectation, and it needs to be articulated and measured. And the details can be up to the local leadership, and hopefully they're pulling in knowledge and ideas from their teams.
Interesting. Andrew, you have things to say about this, I know, but I'm going to challenge you, Andrew. Do not make it sound too easy. You need to get specific and tell us exactly how people should choose these things.
I'll respectfully push back, Rebecca. Like, most of the problems are easy. People make them more complicated. Like,
we do, but like, yeah. Okay, what's the principle?
Sure, I will talk a little bit. And I like also like say that too. Like this panel has been awesome. Like I'm taking notes while y'all are talking. And I know that Pazit and I were doing like a little networking thing afterwards, like a little AMA. Like, so if you have like follow-ups, just reach out to us. We're super accessible. I led the design metrics, like the internal instrumentation, which is an entire category of like, what are the metrics you're tracking to know if the experiences are good and how mature you are and how you're progressing like that. But the high level, because everybody's trying to figure out this problem. And I talked to the other VP leaders at other companies. Everyone's trying to figure this out. And there is no silver bullet. There's no golden snitch that makes you win the game of metrics and maturity. But like what you can do, because we're all smart design leaders on this conference right now, is that you take the goals and expectations of the enterprise and you understand the product goals and you understand the design goals. And if you can do the red thread, like the thing that connects those three, those are the metrics. Those are the things you focus on. And I'll dig a little deeper into that too. Like the Pareto principle, where it's like, if you can identify like the 20% that's going to give you the 80% of the value, 80% of the effectiveness, 80% of the influence, like those few things, which are really going to move the needle, your job just got a whole lot easier.
That's good.
I think you can also simplify it. I mean, what does it really mean to build great products, right? Great products answer or try to solve customer problems, right? How do we understand customer problems? It's by talking to customers. So one of the metrics can be, are we talking to customers? How many customers are we talking to within a certain period of time? Who is talking to the customers? Is it just us, or do we involve? So you can set up some goals. We want to make sure that we talk to 5 customers every 2 weeks, and we expose that to X amount of people in the organization, and boom, you have some metrics that you can measure yourself. You like, after 6 months, have we done that? and then so forth. So you can kind of break down the process. Think about, what is maturity? What makes us mature, and break it down to the actual things that you need to do in order to get mature, and then measure based on those.
That's so smart. And I think kind of ingrained in what you said there, a lot of it is just starting, because most of this behavior of measuring, it is a behavior and it has to be practiced. And a lot of the hangups tend to be that we're just not familiar. It's not a muscle that we tend to use in design naturally. But once you start, it kind of avalanches after a while. You kind of get addicted to like figuring out what your next metric is and how you're going to move it. And then you start like benchmarking them over time, and you get really fancy and make dashboards like Andrew does. But I think you're right. I think it can be just really simple. Like, are we doing this behavior or not? And just start there and then build on it.
Yep. And, numbers are not our enemy. They're our friends. And we need to kind of learn as designers to embrace numbers, to embrace statistics, to understand that language. It's really important. So, like, if I have one advice, is go out there and, like, educate yourself about numbers, statistics, experimentation. It will definitely help make you a better designer, and bring that into the organization, and it will help make the organization more mature.
Yeah, and it helps the business understand design a little more.
Couldn't agree more. Exactly. I mean, understanding and being able to speak in that language gives you the right to be at the table, right? Because that's the only language that leadership, engineering, and others in power understand. So unless you speak that language, you're not gonna have that seat. And creating that tripod balance, really, that's where the maturity really kicks in. So totally agree.
Very true. Power's in the numbers. Next question. This is kind of a speculative why question, but I'm interested to hear what y'all think about this. What are the main reasons that financial services tends to have low maturity as an industry? What do you think?
I can start there. I think so. Again, I think it goes back to thinking about financial institutions and technology companies that are building financial products. So there are two separate things. So technology companies that are building financial products, you can think about Robinhood or Stripe or Chime. They know how to build software. They know the process. Those are, in my opinion, are mature, a lot of those organizations. So the other side is financial institutions. You're talking about the 100-year banks that are just now realizing that if they don't catch up to the technology companies, they're going to stay behind. There is a lot of change management there. You have a lot of processes that have been instilled for years and years that coming in and trying to change that is really, really hard. And I think that's really the core of the problem. Trying to change mindsets and behaviors and frameworks. It is, to me, I think that is kind of where it starts, and the ability to go in there and bringing those new methodologies and new ways of thinking about, switching from financial institution to, okay, we're going to think differently. We're going to actually build products. Who do we need to bring in? What do we need to do? What are the processes? What are the tools? So it's a lot of change management.
Yep, it's the people. Do y'all have anything to add, Andrew and Pete?
None other than that it's kind of been covered, but if you're not a technology company at your core, or you turn into one, you're just not going to make it, right? It is like MasterCard being a technology leader in the payments industry and continuing to be aggressive is key, right? So never rest on your laurels. You got to continue to be aggressive, and that's what makes it fun, right? That's what makes it fun to come to work and continue to solve those problems. And if you fall back on like, hey, we've been around forever, nothing good will come from that. So staying aggressive, rely on emerging technology, and just continue to invent.
Yeah. I've also noticed that at some of the largest organizations, when they realized they needed to invest in design and they needed to inject design maturity into their organization, the way they went about that was they just blew up an entire design organization overnight. Like suddenly they had a CDO and they had VPs of design and they had all these design teams, and they just bashed them into the organization and then imbued them with power and told everyone else to adjust, which, it takes years for that to settle down, that the aftershocks of that. And so that's one side of the spectrum. And then the other side is the ones that they had a few designers, but they were completely disempowered, and they had to slowly build up this groundswell effort over time and fight these long, systems of inertia and people who had been in their jobs for 30 years. And it's a lot to overcome no matter which way they go at it. I don't know if there's any best way to do that.
I think you need to have support from the top. So I think for a change like that to happen in a financial institution that is used to doing something the same way for the last 50, 100 years, you need the top management to have the conviction that that's the path forward, and to have that urgency that if we're not going that path, then we're just going to disappear, in the next 8 years. And when you have that buy-in and support from the top, it's easier. It's almost impossible if it's bottom up to make a change like that in a financial institution.
A sweeping change, anyway.
Yeah.
All right, let's do one more question. On that slide where we were talking about whether, this is a quick one actually, whether high maturity delivers outsized benefits, and that whole, the highly mature versus the low mature and how much money they were affecting. Yes, that does apply to B2B scenarios. Those were all lumped together, B2B and B2C, so there's no separation there, but a lot of those are B2B, so definitely yes. I like the outcomes versus output, yes. Actually, that is a huge maturity factor when you're looking at customer outcomes versus just like, are we putting out a bunch of prototypes? We did the scorecard. Let's see. Ooh, the guild structure. Interesting to hear about the guild structure having accountability. Can you tell us more specifically about how to move existing guilds to start working on their accountability structure? So if you already have a group of leaders together, what might you do to get them started on like, hey, maybe we should have some kind of accountability metrics that we share?
Wow. The first thing that comes to mind is find or be the champion. Hopefully I'm reading the question right, but if the person that is asking this question in their organization, they already have an existing guild structure within other functions, I would say you need to find a champion immediately, and then point to the circle around the campfire that already exists and say, I want to be part of that. And we want to replicate the existing system that is already in place, and build from there. And obviously, yes, you probably need a very senior leader, and then just build from there. But if you're not like at a senior leadership level, just be that champion at the level where you're at, and start carrying that torch, right? And start talking about the benefits, and point to successes within the company as well as outside.
Those junior designers who do that, who hold up the signs and start the champions, those are the ones I look at when I start thinking about promotions.
Yep.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
All right.
And then they start holding you as a leader accountable to keep that momentum going. So it just gets to be, maybe tough, but fun. Now you're starting to move boulders, and that gets to be really, really rewarding.
I know we've thrown a lot at everyone today, and so I just want to point out that if you go to the handouts, there is an Envision handout over there. It says Envision Accelerating Design Maturity. It's actually more like a list of links. But if you want to go back and look in further detail at that design maturity data, it also has links to financial services maturity information, all kinds of stuff in there, and actual examples and stories like the ones you heard today. It's kind of just a resource list for you that lists a lot of the things that we talked about today so that you can actually peruse them slowly instead of just trying to take screenshots. But mostly, I want to thank you three so much for being here and sharing your stories. This was a lot of fun. And also, we have one more poll for you. Like we talked about, Envision is always still studying design maturity. We started with looking at 2,000 companies. Now I think we've looked at 11,000 total, and we're continuing to update this data as we go. But as part of this, we have a design maturity assessment that we offer. It is, alongside our Envision Enterprise products. That's, the platform that everyone uses to, work from design all the way through engineering. But the assessment is much more of a people tool. It helps you to assess your current practices and see what kind of business impacts your design organization might already be having. And also, like Pete said, identify where your gaps might be, which behaviors you're not practicing. So if you'd like help with that, or if you'd like to just hear more about Envision Enterprise as a platform, just fill that out. And I think I'll hand it back to the team. Thank you all so much for doing this today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Great opportunity. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody. Absolutely incredible conversation. If you enjoyed it as much as we have, please write in the chat and the comments so that our panelists and Rebecca can see your comments on what you thought of that conversation. I just want to say once again, thank you to Rebecca for hosting this. You've been a brilliant host. I think we all agree, one of the best that we've seen on our conferences. So thank you so much for joining us and collaborating today, and to the Envision team in the background helping with all of this stuff.